I do hope in time that some commemoration will be made in his native parish to remember this incredible man. This is John Mulvany's story, based largely on a biography written by Thomas P. Chute in 1909 and on the forensic research carried out by John's grandniece, Anne Weber Scobie, who spent 40 years at the task. Still, in different publications and articles, contradictions do exist. I tried to stay as loyal as possible to Anne Weber's work. I owe everything to the extended Mulvany family members for sharing so much information. I am sure that there's even more information that may exist locally, and we would warmly welcome any gems of information. Be assured that we'll be treated most respectfully as we endeavour to better know this great man and his works. John Mulvany was born in Dyrallagh, Moynalty in 1839 to Francis Fanny Lee and Thomas Mulvany, tenant farmers on 16 acres of land. The Mulvany homestead, a fine structure now derelict, is accessed by a 1 kilometre lane via the townland of Fia off the Moynalty-Braidwood Road. The last occupant of that house was Ellie O'Brien, who lived there until her passing in 1977. John's father, Thomas, he would have been involved in political activism during the Tide Wars of 1829 to 1832. He was once charged with attacking a man with a scythe. The case was dropped, however, when it came to trial because the alleged victim had a gun. Thomas was later recorded with others as having an unregistered weapon in Fia in 1841. John was one of 4 brothers, all destined at time to emigrate to America. It was James, born in 1835, John in 1839, Thomas in 1841, Peter in 1844. These were the worst years of the Braid family. Sadly, Thomas Mulvany Sr. died in 1844, one of many who died or left as the population of the townland of Dyrallagh declined from 169 in 1841 to 67 in 1851, a 60% drop. It did appear worse in the Newcastle end of the parish, as overall, according to Father Valfar's book, Not So Much to One Side, the overall reduction was 40%, from 6,453 in 1841 to 3,894 in 1851. John's mother Fanny, however, went on to have a long life, passing away in 1883. The Protestant landlord of Dyrallagh at the time was Arthur Cornwallis Pollock, descended from linen traders in Uri. His father John, a lawyer, had held various high political positions and was a close friend and investor for the Marquess of Downshire, one of the largest landowners in Ireland. Together, they took a strong stance against United Irishmen, including paying informers. They were responsible for the arrest, for example, of the leaders Thomas Russell and Samuel Nielsen in 1796. In 1809, he is recorded as warning Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, then British Prime Minister, against the dangers of Catholic emancipation. However, in 1816, he was accused of fraud and thereafter shunned by society. He died in 1825. His son Arthur, in contrast, travelled Europe and Russia as a young man and settled for the life of country gentlemen at their home in Mountainstown at Castletown now. He served as High Sheriff of Meath in 1809 and died in 1846. He was a founder member of the Meath Hunt. It may be noteworthy that the Pollock family were not listed with other local landlords who held a general meeting of the people of Moynalty parish about the state of the potato crop in 1845 as the potato blight spread. Arthur was succeeded by his son, John Osborne George Pollock, Justice of the Peace and Deputy Lieutenant of Meath. He served as High Sheriff of the county in 1854. John Mulvany's upbringing and harsh experiences in youth certainly influenced his political leanings later in life. His friend, Thomas P. Chute, who we believe originally was from Oldcastle, stated in 1909 that Master Patrick Rogers of Cremeen National School, a Clareman widely travelled within Ireland, held strong nationalist views, instilling these in his students. John's mother married a neighbouring widower, Owen O'Brien, in 1845. He brought 2 sons and 2 daughters to the marriage. Fanny and Owen went on to have at least 4 other children. Alice, known as Ali, born in 1848, who we will meet later in New York. Pat, 1851, Lawrence, 1853, and Mary, 1855. In 1851, with desperation in their hearts and a true sense of adventure, John, aged 12, and his older brother James, aged 17, headed off to Dublin to find passage to America. Anne Webber tells a story that Owen O'Brien sold a horse for £40. The next thing, the 2 boys headed off. The 2 youngsters could not book passage on the ship to America alone, so they had to find another way. On the docks, John and James got separated. Undaunted, John, seeing a large family preparing to board, got on a ship, blending in with them. The mother took pity on him and allowed him to pretend to be a family member for the trip. When the ship arrived at New York's East River docks, John was on his own. Little did he know that he was arriving in America at a tumultuous time in its history. Firstly, the indigenous American tribes were being driven from their lands. Successive administrations had broken treaties, destroyed their livelihoods and culture, and were killing them and driving them into reservations. This was to enable arriving settlers to obtain land and go west to follow their dreams, having left, as was the case with the Mulvanys and others from Moynalty, poverty and death at home. Then there was the inevitability of the American Civil War in 1861 to 1865, which John Mulvany would encounter firsthand, and his own brother Thomas fighting. In 1850, America was a very different nation to what we know today. The green area there, less than half of the land area, was the United States. There was a large area called unorganized territory, the area in white. It was called that by the whites, where the remaining Indian nations existed. The very term unorganized highlights the ultimate goal of the US government. The state of Iowa was then the farthest west of New York by land. The states were divided economically and in relation to the issue of slavery. This map indicates the split between North, which was the Union, and the South Confederates, which would lead to the Civil War in 1861. So again, the green, the Union states, and the yellow are the Confederate states. However, by 1865, mainland USA was more or less politically formed as we know it today. Marked on the map are some of the cities that Mulvany visited during his life. And Mulvany and Montana, where the Battle of the Little Bighorn was up there at the top. And obviously we've got New York, Washington, DC. But anyway, these areas will come known to us. Colorado is the key one, Salida, that'll come out, and then Iowa, of course. If today we live in a time when the US President says, let's make America great again, then this was the time of Make America Great. John was probably oblivious to much of this when he arrived in America. He did have his wits about him though, as he had made contacts on the Atlantic crossing and had already arranged a job working on the Lake Erie Canal in New York State. After a short stop in New York City, he was soon working hard on his job in the canal. When James arrived, he made his way to Iowa, where others from Moynalty had gone. So this is an actual picture of the mules being drawn and the barges being drawn on the Lake Erie Canal. John's job at Lake Erie was as a towboy. He worked and walked the mules, who pulled the barges from Albany, New York to Buffalo, a distance of 302 miles, doing 4 or 5 trips every summer for the next 5 years. This would have allowed him to settle in and save some money as well. During the winters, when the canal would be frozen, Mulvany would spend time in New York City. There he would get some odd jobs, obtain some more formal schooling, and he also began to visit the Dusseldorf Gallery, which must have been like a treasure trove of beautiful art to him in such sumptuous surroundings. Mulvany knew it was time to get serious about pursuing his art, so he left his job on the canal. He got a job as a messenger, cleaner, and even as a model in the New York Academy of Design, NAD. Professor Wainsford took John under his wing, having encouraged him to seek a scholarship in school. He enrolled as a student. It was 1859, and he was now actively engaged in his lifelong dream of becoming an artist. Here's an early artwork that was accepted as an exhibit during his time in the New York Academy of Design in 1860. Very different to the type of paintings for which he would later become famous. While there, Mulvany would have seen and been influenced by his first large-scale historical painting, Washington Crossing the Delaware by Emanuel Lutz, which was 21 feet by 12 feet, when he later painted his most famous masterpiece. Mulvany also became a talented colorist, colorizing black and white drawings. One newspaper called him a phenomenon. It was a well-paid skill by the period's newspapers and weekly magazines. His work became so well known that in 1861 he got a lucrative move to Chicago to work for Irish newspapers in the city. There he connected with the powerful Irish nationalist movement in Chicago. Many would be members of the Fenians and then later Clan Gael. That connection would last throughout his life. It is likely that he attended the first Fenian Brotherhood Conference in 1863 in Philadelphia, and certainly did attend the second in Cincinnati in 1865. Just to put this better in context, the Fenian Brotherhood were quite active, and they undertook a number of failed armed incursions into Canada in 1866 and again in 1870 and 1871. The objective was to bring pressure on the British government, who ruled Canada, to withdraw from Ireland. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was the first US war the reporters and artists heavily covered. Mulvany got a job with newspaperman Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner during this time. Brady sent him to his studio in Washington until 1865. While there, he painted the following landscapes. And again, note the contrast in styles adopted. Being based in Washington, Mulvany became acquainted with many famous commanders of the war, including Irish-Americans Phil Sheridan, born in Albany, New York, and parents from Killincare, County Cavan, John Logan, Thomas Francis Marr, and Chicagoan James Mulligan. He met George Armstrong Custer as well, with whom he would later be so famous, strongly connected. Seeing war up close, Mulvany was filled with thoughts of the great battles of Irish history, and how few had been ever depicted in art. He returned to Chicago after the war, thinking of being the first artist to do that. The Irish American Club in St. Louis had a program running at the time to aid young Irish people with potential, Through this, Samuel B. Coate from St. Louis recognized his talent, funded a trip to Europe for him in 1869. John first studied briefly in Paris before being accepted into the premier art academy in Munich, Germany, under Karl von Plitti. In 1871, he won the Academy's Medal of Honor. He then went on to study in Antwerp, Paris, and Amsterdam. Mulvany stopped off on a visit to Ireland. He travelled widely, visiting many places he had learned of from Master Rogers. He made many drawings, studies, and detailed notes, planning an exhibition of Irish historical paintings and landscapes that he would complete on his return to America. Thomas Tuohy recalls Mulvany's great disappointment when he was refused permission to sketch the high crosses in Kells churchyard. His response was that he would paint a picture of hell, placing this person in it, appealing for just one cooling touch of a Celtic cross on his heated brow. Mulvany returned to Chicago in 1871 with his collection of materials for a series of planned paintings, including the Siege of Acclaim, the Battle of Benburb, the women defending the walls of Limerick, and O'Neill's challenge. He set up a studio, but his timing could not have been more unfortunate. In October, the Great Chicago Fire consumed his studio and all his possessions, including his Irish works. Devastated, this prompted him to move west for several years. Having checked in with Mr. Coates' patron, he then went to visit his three brothers in Eldon, Iowa. Peter had become a successful businessman and town treasurer. James was farming then, later turning to mining, and Thomas, a teetotaler, and his wife Annie had opened a very successful, but somewhat notorious saloon in the Prohibitionist town. In 1873, while drinking whiskey at Thomas's saloon in Eldon, he heard of a trial taking place in the town. He went to see what was going on. The rest is history. In 1876, Mulvany got his first national recognition for the painting, Preliminary Trial of a Horse Thief, seen in a Western Justice's Court. He received much acclaim. He entered it in the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia and has sold for $5,250, which is approximately $160,000 today. Over the next few years, he painted many pictures of the Wild West, gaining great reputation. Here we see the Travels of Yellowstone, 1877, Back to the Wigwam, 1881, Perils of the Pony Express, 1888, Red Cloud, 1877, fierce stories about him. Also, Watching the Birds, 1877, which has a later context for us here. The Waterfall, and Figures by Lakeside. He also made money painting portraits of some very well-known Western figures. While Mulvany was doing these paintings, General George A. Custer and 200 members of the 7th Cavalry under his direct command were wiped out in June 1876 at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in Montana by a force of over 2,000 native Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Custer had attacked the sleeping Indian camp, believing intelligence reports that there were 800 warriors. Custer had divided his regiment to surround and attack the Indian camp, preventing them escaping, stating, "There's enough for us all, lads." The strategy failed, as they were unable to support each other in the face of a larger force. The native Indian forces lost 50 warriors in the battle that lasted 2 hours. 32 of the dead were Irish born, according to Miles Duncan in his book, How the Irish Won the West, and considerably more with Irish parentage. There were 15 Irish sergeants and 3 Irish colonels in Custer's command, as well as former mercenary and Civil War veteran Captain Miles Keogh of County Carlow, who was left unmutilated by the Indians, most likely as he was wearing an impressive medal awarded to him by Pope Pius IX for his service in the Papal Army. It would have resembled pendants the native Indians wore to ward off evil spirits. Sioux reports afterwards said he died the bravest death and was the last blue coat to fall. He is seen kneeling at the right of Custer in the painting with his head bandaged. This is the first American report of the battle. Note there were many inaccuracies, as there were no survivors, and Custer also lost a lot of family members. Custer had a braw for the Irish, as in addition to the number of Irish in his unit, he had famously adopted the tune Carry On as the regimental song. I was going to play it, but I his trademark buckskin jacket was sewn by the regiment's tailor, Sergeant Jeremiah Finlay from Tipperary. News of the disaster caused a sensation around the country, an outrage among the white Americans, who sought and got brutal retaliation against the Native Indians, leading to their ultimate defeat and humiliation. Mulvany later recalled, "I had once realised that this was the greatest subject for a battle picture known to American history. I had been seeking for a subject that would be fresh in the minds." Mulvany, our man from Moynalty, visited the battlefield in Montana twice to understand the terrain and observed cavalrymen, Native Americans in nearby Fort Leavenworth and on the Sioux reservations. He hired translators to gather accounts of the battle from the Sioux and Cheyenne. It is said that he visited City Hall in Canada so that his painting could capture every minute detail of the battle and its contents. Mulvany painted his massive canvas, measuring 20 feet by 11 feet, of the battle in Kansas City, Missouri, completing it in 1881. It took him 2 years to complete the task. This is the original painting that he prepared for copyright purposes in 1881. And then this is the actual painting. A Missouri publication stated that he left a debt of $450 for unpaid room and board on the St. James at the St. James Hotel in Kansas City. However, he did leave behind 2 paintings, The Old Professor and Love's Mirror, which were sold the following year by the sheriff for $450, covering the bill. No, both paintings are now located. Amazing paintings. He travelled east to exhibit his work, going first briefly to New York, then to Boston, where he made slight alterations. He reduced Custer's size, replacing his left-hand sabre with a handgun, and shortened his hair, as Custer had recently had a haircut. Throngs of excited admirers came to view the painting. Back then, paintings and drawings were the only way people had to see about it. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, said of the painting, "Nothing in the books like it. Homer, nothing in Shakespeare, more grim and sublime than either. All native, all our own, and all a fact." It is said that when Custer's widow, Libby, saw the image, she swooned. She would make it her life's work to lionize her husband in American history. Mulvany and 2 Irish journalist friends, Governor James O'Kelly and Mayo man John Finnerty, did much to absolve Custer of responsibility for defeat at the Little Big Horn, blaming others for leaving him stranded, thereby casting General George Armstrong Custer as the heroic figure in the public eye. The painting would travel around the country for 17 years, with and without Mulvany. When he was there, Mulvany would be feted as a celebrity, sometimes with receptions complete with a band. The The charge was 25 cents for adults and half for children. In San Francisco, we're told that they also had Sioux Indians performing the ghost dance. This would have been controversial, as in 1890, the dance was banned on Lakota Sioux reservations by the US government. The painting was also exhibited at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, celebrating 400 years since Christopher Columbus discovered America. It's said that he used his friend, General Philip Sheridan's image, regarded as one of the country's greatest generals in the painting. You can see here that this is one of the characters on the painting. That's his actual picture there. He's the only soldier, military man, to appear on a $10 banknote in America, and only one of 53 persons, including presidents, to appear on the US currency bill. It was issued in 1890 and 1891. So, in 1883, Mulvany returned to Ireland to begin the work on a series of patriotic Irish paintings under the patronage of Dyrallagh in Chicago. However, storm clouds were forming there. The organisation was about to undergo a bitter dispute between Alexander O'Sullivan, a Chicago lawyer and Dyrallagh leader in Chicago, and his former friend, Dr. Patrick Cronin. Dyrallag's links to shady thugs and liquor dealers was also under scrutiny. Mulvany was good friends with Cronin, which would soon prove to be a problem. In Ireland, Mulvany began work on the Battle of Aughrim, which was fought in County Galway, the bloodiest battle ever fought in Irish soil, where William's forces defeated the largely Catholic Jacobite army in 1691, with the loss of over 7,000 lives. The Jacobites, it said, had the upper hand until their French commander, Saint Ruth, was decapitated by a cannonball, just as he believed the battle could be won. Despite gallant efforts, without him, the battle was lost. This followed the Battle of the Boyne and signalled the end of the dream of Catholic governance in Ireland. At this time, the clan was supporting the so-called dynamite campaign against Great Britain. In January 1885, Mulvany travelled to London to research and sketch uniforms and weapons used in the battle at the Tower of London. While there, he was treated with suspicion due to his known political leanings. As it happened, he was secretly warned to leave immediately, and a series of bombs went off in the tower a couple of days later. He was sure that had he not left, he would have ended up in British jail. This is the painting. He fled to France, where he completed the painting later that year. He was concerned as he knew that he was under surveillance in Paris by the British authorities. He also knew that he had to face up to this. He secretly sent some artwork to America and then brought the painting to Dublin in July. The authorities couldn't have fought it, for after all, it was a painting of famous British victory. The painting created an instant sensation, especially in the nationalist community. The founder of the Irish National Land League, Michael Davitt, later wrote to Mulvany saying, "You deserve the thanks of the entire Irish race, for it is in you, for in it you have not only upheld the artistic reputation of Ireland, but your genius has transferred it to canvas. The dauntless bravery of those who died their land to save, an Aughrim slogan." He also praised Mulvany for teaching subsequent generations the great lesson in a nation's march to freedom, which your brush now most eloquently enforces. Thomas Jude points out that at this time, Mulvany was at the peak of his powers. He was alert, active, full of hopes and ideals, a wonderful conversationalist, charming and handsome, a genial companion, equally fluent in several languages. It was a privilege and a pleasure to spend time with him. He also had a deep knowledge of poetry and philosophical sayings and of history and current affairs. However, when Mulvany returned to Chicago in 1886, the problems between Alexander O'Sullivan and Dr. Patrick Cronin had exploded. Cronin had accused O'Sullivan of stealing $100,000, today approximately $3.5 million, from a fund collected for the families of those killed or jailed during the Dynamite campaign. Cronin shared his evidence of O'Sullivan's activities with Thomas Chute, who reported all to John Mulvany in Ireland. Cronin, in turn, was accused of treason by O'Sullivan and ordered an internal clan trial to try him. There were 3 jurors from each side. Notably, among O'Sullivan's side was an associate, Daniel Copton, a leading Chicago detective, and a Frenchman, Henry Le Caron, who later transpired to be a British spy of 25 years named Thomas Beach. He had been responsible for the arrest of many of the clan, including those on bombing missions in Britain. This came to light when he gave personal testimony against Charles Stewart Parnell in London in a parliamentary commission hearing based on stories planted by him in the national newspapers. Alexander O'Sullivan and 2 others were found not guilty, and Cronin was expelled from the clan. Beach stated that there were other spies in the clan, so suspicion was cast on Cronin. Dr. Cronin was brutally assassinated in New York in 1889. It was openly known who was responsible for his murder. 3 men were convicted of the murder in 1890. Among them was that same Chicago detective, Daniel Copton, Alexander O'Sullivan's crony. Alexander O'Sullivan, however, was not charged. In a retrial in 1893, Copton was cleared of all charges amid rumours of a bribed jury. The other 2 had died in prison in 1892 of tuberculosis. The murder and the trial caused a major rift in the organisation. Gillian O'Brien of Liverpool University writes, the Clan Gael slowly unravelled, as unedifying details of the inner workings of an idealistic but corrupt movement were exposed to public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Mulvany's world started to fall apart. Innocent, John Mulvany was seen as a Cronin man by O'Sullivan and his supporters. He was not to be trusted. As a result, all financial support from Clan Gael dried up. His commission for the Battle of Aughrim fell through. However, Mulvany, to his credit, did not forsake his friend. Mulvany commemorated Cronin with a life-size portrait which was presented to the Manchester Martyrs commemoration in Chicago later that year. With no patronage from the clan, he was dazed. His dream of a series of works on Irish history was put aside, never to be taken up again. He could not find buyers for his works and ended up in serious debt. His faith in human nature was shattered. He was disappointed at every turn. He would move around to numerous cities around the country, visiting his brother Peter in Salida, Colorado. He went to Utah and painted Brigham Young's portrait, and to many other cities across America, often leaving suddenly and owing money as he went. Along the way, he painted a portrait of the former commander of the Irish Brigade, General Thomas Francis Marr, then acting governor of the Montana Territory. Mulvany opened over 20 studios across the country in his life, continuously painting, such as Black Jack Logan's rallying charge at the Battle of Atlanta, which was commissioned while he was visiting his brothers in Colorado. However, the New York Times later in 1906 stated that he sold his paintings for trifling sums. Somewhere in his western travels, Mulvany married Ellen Welsh in 1890, but they were divorced 2 years later in Colorado. We know little of this, or of his romantic relationship with Lucy Deere, a great-grandniece of John Deere, the tractor man. Lucy was 22 years his junior, but he was very much in love with her. On the artistic front, he continued portrait work, many in private ownership today. This one was actually bought by somebody thinking was one of Jesse James. He created at least 3 Civil War battle works that were well received: Sheridan's Raid at Winchester, Macpherson's and the Revenge, and the Battle of Shiloh. However, his business acumen deserted him. He was robbed of his interest in Sheridan's Raid. All of these works are on location today. John Mulvany's brother Thomas passed away in 1894 in Eldon, Iowa. Just a bit of background. Thomas had served in the Union Army and fought in 8 listed major battles, including Yorktown and Fredericksburg. A non-drinker, he had opened a saloon in Eldon, Iowa. He was known as Stormy Jordan of Eldon. On his death, the local paper, strongly favouring prohibition, described Thomas as a notorious saloon keeper in Latumwa, who operated an establishment known as the Road to Hell. The paper went on, "This frees Eldon of their persistent violators of prohibitionary law." He had become very wealthy, but spent most of his fortune fighting prohibition. In Thomas's death notice, potential saloon owners were told to take warning. His widow, however, Mrs. Annie Mulvany, O'Connor, did not heed the warning and continued operating in Eldon for many years, passing away in 1917. The establishment is still in business today under new management, we believe. On his death, Thomas left 2 sons, Joseph and George, and a daughter, Elizabeth. In 1897, Mulvany moved to Brooklyn, New York, where his half-sister, Ali Muldoon O'Brien, we saw earlier, lived, as he was having health issues. He set up a studio nearby and continued to paint, but also sadly began drinking heavily. Poignantly, he lost his sweetheart Lucy Deere. She was also an artist and worked as a servant at Cortes Records researcher. They had been in contact around this time again. An Oklahoma newspaper carried an article later in 1921 commenting on their relationship. A shadow came between the artist and his sweetheart, a shadow that drove him east again, and so clouded his life that in spite of fame and financial success, John Mulvany saw no lifting of the shadow, except in death. Perhaps in part explanation of what was to come. According to her obituary in 1946, when she died in Sacramento, 40 years ago she was in the headlines when John Mulvany, painter of Custer's last rally, committed suicide in New York, purportedly over his failure to win her love. This is a painting that she actually did in 1910. John's brother Peter, 1843 to 1899, who had always relied upon over the years, passed away in 1899 in Salida, Colorado, the town he had founded. Peter had started off as a railroad contractor, progressing in the railroad business. He located in Eldon, Iowa, and set up a mercantile business and was involved in town affairs. Doing well financially, however, he had a major setback when a fire destroyed his and other businesses in Eldon. He had no insurance, so he had no alternative but go back to railroading. He superintended the construction of the Santa Fe Tunnel through the Raton Mountains in New Mexico and further west through Arizona. He started a new store in Starkville and then moved to Salida, Colorado in 1878-79, being one of the first settlers there who found the town, after coal deposits were located there. He bought significant lots of land there in 1880. He erected a store on First Street. He'd also make deliveries of supplies to Leadville in the mountains where silver had been located and where James, his brother, 1835 to 1907, was employed as a miner. Sadly, Peter had been seriously ill for his last 5 years, having contracted typhoid fever. He owned considerable real estate on his death. He left a wife and 2 children, Rosalie 10 and Tommy 7. This must have hit John hard, having already lost Thomas 5 years earlier. Today, the city of Salida has a population of almost 6,000 people. I just inserted this piece here of personal interest. According to recent correspondence with Anne Weber Scobie, my great-granduncle John McKenna from Mulla and his wife Sarah McGinty emigrated in 1882 to Salida with 5 children to join the Mulvanys there. Their other son James had come to America earlier and settled in Eldon, where Thomas Mulvany remained. Back in Brooklyn, New York, John Mulvany appointed George A. Costello as his agent. Shortly thereafter, Mulvany heard that Custer's last rally had been sold to Henry J. Hines of Ketchick fame for $25,000, but he knew nothing about it. He reached out to Costello. It was a complete mess. Hines were owed money on a failed property deal on Hines' building where the painting was being displayed. Hines seized the building and its contents. Mulvany lost Custer's last stand. And there was no 25,000. He was seen crying in the lobby of Hines' headquarters. Hines did commission him to make a duplicate of the painting and a portrait of Hines for $200. We don't actually know how much he actually received in the end. There is debate today on the location of the original and the duplicate. Anne Weber Scobie reckons that the original is lost and that it's the duplicate that was on display at Hines until 1944, when it was sold. In 2020, it was further sold at auction in Texas. A value of $25 million. Describing it as an invaluable collector's piece of American Western art and a true national treasure. In 2023, the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville, Georgia, was gifted, Custer's last rally, by the Brad Brenner family of North Carolina. This painting has now been lovely restored and is in pristine condition, just as John Mulvany painted it. Mulvany kept the Battle of Aughrim. After his death, Thomas Chute kept it for the family and was exhibited in Denver in 1914. It was sold but disappeared later, only to show up for sale on eBay in 2010 as an American battle scene, listed at $40,000. Irish art historian Niamh O'Sullivan was searching for a different painting when she was shocked to suddenly find it on eBay. She tracked it down and it was bought by the Cavalry in Dublin, later selling it to an Irish private collector for over £240,000 sterling. Going back to Costello, he did help Mulvany get a commission from Dr. Thomas Addison Emmett, grandnephew of Robert Emmett, to paint the definitive portrait of the Patriot. Prior to Dr. Emmett's death, the painting was passed back to Thomas Chute for safekeeping. He later donated it to the Irish nation in 1925, with the understanding that it would be exhibited in Dáil. It was in Dáil for a period, but it's now located in the Irish Embassy in Rome. This is my favourite. Somewhat nostalgically, here we see a painting named for his half-sister, Ali, which he did in 1900, called Alice Muldoon's Horse. Despite all of his apparent success, Mulvany found himself in hard times and disappointed. He felt that Costello had cheated him the profits on the sale of Custer to Hines. This was never resolved for him. Ali had to talk him out of pawning the medal he had been awarded by the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Munich years before. Mulvany did paint the Boer Scouts around this time. In 1902, a local newspaper editor, George Rowe, discovered Mulvany, quote, reduced in circumstances and spirit, painting figures of angels in a loft for a local builder. Rowe tried to help him and asked him to paint a portrait of his son, if he would still be able to do so. This is a picture of John Mulvany around the time. Still looking very sharp, I think. Mulvany was very enthusiastic with the prospect of doing a portrait again, and both were very pleased with the painting. Rowe found him more work, including a portrait of Mayor Dunn of Chicago and other prominent people. However, the New York Times stated that he was too broken to do much, and he was willing to sell his paintings for almost nothing, including The Striker, a painting of a miner and his family looking in anger and despair at the collieries in working condition while they were in abject poverty. In 1902, he exhibited a new work called Amicus. It features 6 men cutting cards to determine who would commit a murder. Many thought the figures were recognizable as the members of Clan Gael Mulvany believed had been part of the murder of Dr. Cronin. Friends warned him that he was antagonizing dangerous men, but he ignored them. Sadly, the whereabouts of this painting are now unknown. Mulvany's last recorded painting was a portrait of Bishop MacDonald of Brooklyn, New York in 1905, also now lost. By 1906, the 66-year-old Mulvany had been diagnosed with throat cancer, a terminal condition in those days. He also suffered from vertigo and had fallen a number of times in his final months. He was evicted from his apartment in March 1906 for non-payment of rent and may have been living on the street, although Anne Weber states that he was staying with his sister, Ali. His health had seriously deteriorated. On May the 23rd, 1906, Mulvany's body was found floating in the East River, New York. He'd been missing for 3 weeks. Some speculated about the possibility of foul play after his anger in Clan Gael. But 4 years had passed, making it somewhat unlikely. His autopsy report was destroyed by fire, so we will never know. Did he fall from the ferry or was he pushed? The city newspapers reported that it was likely suicide. In his pockets was a small replica of his Custer painting and some newspaper clippings of glowing reviews, as well as a warm letter from Mayor Dunn of Chicago. However, there was also a letter from the Indianapolis Gallery saying that they would not exhibit this painting, The Striker, and also this poem. "I'm lonesome tonight, Biddy Martin, and myself I don't know what to do. Sure, I'd go to the christening and whistling, were it not of me thinking of you. But I'll to New York, Biddy Martin, to me cousins beyond the deep sea, and when I'm there, Biddy Martin, I think you'll be thinking of me." This is the New York Times headline in 1906. "From a fine physique of a man," the New York Times obituary states, "handsome features and a kindly countenance, he had sunk to a ragged derelict, uncertain of a night's lodging or a day's food." Like so many famous Irish-born New Yorkers, Mulvany was buried in Cavalry Cemetery in Queens. Finally, I just want to express all our thanks and recognition to Thomas P. Chute for his biography of John Mulvany in 1909, capturing his life story. This is actually how it was printed. We owe immense gratitude to John Mulvany's grandniece, Anne Weber Scobie, in America, who completed very significant research, much of which is used in this presentation. She spent 40 years in her work and located many of his paintings. Here she is in the Booth Western Art Museum, Cartersville, Georgia, seeing the painting for the first time. I think she's about 76 at this stage. My sincere thanks to a Moynalty relative of John Mulvany who wishes to remain anonymous for generously sharing the amount of information with me, including a very informative 2023 article by by Joe Gannon. Also the Wild Geese online internet article which first made me aware of John Mulvany. Angela Lynch for practical help and encouragement. All the wider Mulvany family for their consent and support to do this. My family for putting up with me while I was immersed in the world of John Mulvany. This was an amazing journey for me. As each item searched out a colour and detail of John Mulvany's incredible life story, I'm left in awe of the man's immense courage, talent, and humanity. We do have an epilogue, which is cheerful. I received a call from Gabriel Mulvany, who invited me to join him and his wife at their daughter's Elaine's house in Kells. There, they showed me an original John Mulvany painting, Watching Birds. I think I did something other people. Which was painted in 1877, that they had bought at White's auction in Dublin. I also saw a painting Elaine had done separately before she bought the painting, following arts class in the solstice in Navan, incredibly entitled, Where Are They? It was about the harm we've all done, So I can't see Elaine because I've got my glasses on. So maybe Elaine will come up and maybe say a few words and maybe show something incredible. Sure.
Thank you. We've brought it along for people to have a look. So you come up and have a look at everything, and this is my uncle Fergus here, and my dad can't be here at the moment, but we just came across it and went to the auction and bid on it and got it, myself and my dad. So it was complete fluke that I had even seen it online. Crazy coincidence that I happened to look and it happened to be there. So my dad said, well, we're not letting this go. So,
who originally had it before you bought it? Did you find out who originally had it? Was
no,
it from America or was it from
we asked. It was an Irish auction house. So I think it was an Irish person who had it before us, but I don't know for sure. But they said they couldn't tell us, GDPR. But yeah, so feel free to have a look and take any photos you want to.
So I just wanted to express obviously gratitude to the Northern Community Council and Jimmy and Marie, and obviously Paul. Thank you very much, Paul, for everything. Hope you enjoyed the talk. And my only ambition in all of this is to raise awareness for John Mulvany and hope that there will be some commemorative, something to commemorate in this parish. That's all.
Well done, John.